SEO does a lot of exercises. There is all kinds of dialogues, confidence building measures. But then Russia has its own security organization. Because after all, Russia wants to still be the dominant power. It doesn't want to hand over the security of the Central Asian republics to China. But China is rising. Will China forever keep quiet?
So this week in your column, Rajamandala, you speak about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and how it's going to deal with Afghanistan. There's one interesting comment you make in there about the Sino-Russian security cooperation and how that may not be, and how the SCO highlights that because of Russia's own sort of control over its former Soviet backyard, the Asian republics, as well as others. So do you think that how far that can be actually something that the Chinese and Russians eventually will have differences on security concerns, particularly in Afghanistan, where there will be more and more players and a lot of churn in the coming months?
I think it's dangerous to speculate where we might be a few years down the road. But what is important to note is that, look, Russia and China have never been as close partners as they are today. This is from Putin and Xi, both of them saying their alliance is now strong. But a lot of it was premised, some of it like BRICS global framework was premised on, opposition to the United States. But in the regional thing, there was a specific context of American presence, American activism. So what we don't know at this point is, look, if the Americans are pulled out, and if the assumption that, look, Americans are in retreat, what happens to a coalition that was built on keeping the Americans out? So that is the first point. The second, I think there is a lot of coordination. The SCO does a lot of exercises. There is all kinds of dialogues, confidence building measures. But then Russia has its own security organization. Because after all, Russia wants to still be the dominant power. It doesn't want to hand over the security of the Central Asian republics to China. But China is rising. Will China forever keep quiet? Or, for example, in Afghanistan, if China makes a big breakthrough on the backs of Pakistan, how would Russia see? So these are interesting questions. I think what we need to do in Delhi, don't take things for granted. We've taken too much on declaratory formulations, but there are contradictions between different actors, even those who are on the same side. So I think for us to be able to monitor these contradictions becomes very, very important.
So to go to what you were saying about so many of things like BRICS, I mean, going by how the non-aligned movement in its own time was based on a particular politics of the time. So you see things like the non-aligned movement becoming even in principle defunct in a unipolar world. And now that we are, well, not quite bipolar, but that American supremacy is not what it was, say, 20 years ago or 15 years ago, when a lot of these ideas were formed, where China is emerging as the other global power to a degree. How do you think that these organizations will have to adapt or even to stay relevant in this sort of the changed circumstance of how America also sees its own role in terms of intervening around the world?
Yes, I think we should be clear that, look, India's non-alignment was not such a simple linear thing that we were always anti-American. That when the Chinese attacked India, Nehru himself turned to the Americans. He requested American Air Force to come and help. We got a lot of assistance from the Americans. So I think this assumption somehow we were always anti-American and we were always, pro-China, pro-Russia is not correct. Second, I think when China and Russia broke up, and then Russia started getting close to India, and in fact, when the Americans pulled out in the 60s as a tried up in Vietnam War, after 65 war between India and Pakistan, they said, look, plague on both your houses. They just walked away. It was Russia that was doing the mediation between India and Pakistan. After all, in Tashkent, it was Russia who was brokering peace on Kashmir. And then you have, when the Russians and the Chinese started fighting, 69 onwards, and US and China got together, we turned to the Russians. Just look, between 62 and 71, there's only not even 10 years.
Yeah.
So I think it is context dependent and not a first principle high principle kind of a narrative that in India we've constructed for ourselves. Well, actually, all countries have to balance their environment and they face, depending on the kind of threats they face, they also choose the partners that can deal with them. But in our narrative, we kind of is a fixed, Americans were always bad, Russians were always great, Russians were friends of the non-aligned movement. But if we go back to the 50s, I mean, Russians were denouncing Nehru as well.
Yeah.
That Nehru was too, bourgeois, too pro-West, while Chinese were denouncing him for the same reasons. But later, Russia became friends with India. So I think there is always a change. So we should not go by this first principle, political, ideological framework. There are elements of it, but important thing is, where does India face threats? So my sense is, if the Americans pull back, as you pointed out, then when we walked into the BRICS, what was the problem? We thought Americans were trying to get hold of Kashmir. We need a balance. So they were trying to roll back India's nuclear program. They were not giving us much support on counterterrorism. Therefore, we said, look, we need to hedge against American power. So we joined BRICS. Now, who is posing a threat to you today? It is China that is sitting on your territory. Americans are not sitting on your territory. On the Kashmir question, US has become neutral. They don't take Pakistan's side. They're giving us a lot of support on terrorism. Americans ended the nuclear blockade on India, while the Chinese have tried to stop it. So if you take three big metrics, terrorism, Kashmir, Pakistan, and your own security, Americans are more positive to India today.
Yeah.
So India's already moved, but that doesn't mean you're going to abandon BRICS.
So
what's happened in BRICS is what happened in BRICS is China has become so much bigger.
Yeah.
China is bigger than the other four countries put together. So that itself creates a dynamic of its own.
So now going forward, so you mentioned how despite the fact that there may not be coordinated action in the way that we see from an SCO, but India should use these spaces, still multilateral organizations, for its diplomacy, for diplomatic purposes. So is there a sense that, just from the face of it, it looks like in these regional groupings, SARC is because of India-Pakistan differences, as you point out in the article, which everyone should read. It will be in the IndianExpress.com as well as wherever you're seeing this video, probably you should have a link. Anyway, so with SARC, with BRICS becoming, because of China, there is a feeling that in the neighborhood itself, the regional groupings, sort of regionalism or just the coordination within South Asia and within the larger Asian region, India is somehow falling behind. There is the Quad, which is still in its nascent stages, whatever form it takes, and only Japan is a sort of Asian power in the Quad. So how do we see that? What is it that we can do diplomatically, or what should the diplomatic corps be looking at as its next steps?
I think in South Asia, it doesn't depend on regional organizations. After all, barring Afghanistan, anyway, now we have a problem there. India has no borders. India has borders with all these countries, and none of them are borders with each other. So you can keep talking till the cows come home about how great SARC is. There are two problems there. Pakistan says, look, I don't want to trade with you, my friend. I don't like you. Till you solve the Kashmir dispute, I'm not even going to trade. So let's do SARC. But point is, Pakistan is saying, I prefer trading with China rather than trading with you. I don't want to buy, even when you can offer me cheap sugar and cement, I'll rather get it from the international market. So they're making a political statement. And I think we got to recognize that, rather than saying somehow there is going to be a regional organization. So what is the answer to it? The answer is, look, if India is generous to its neighbors on a bilateral basis, because you don't need a regional organization. If India gives market access, what do our neighbors complain about? India's market is closed. There are too many non-tariff barriers. It's not easy to do business with India. If you simplify those things, so the logic of geography will work for you. But the problem is we've inherited a legacy of an economic structure that treats Bhutan and America in the same bad way. We don't like anybody getting access to a market. Or when you shut down when you demonetize, you don't tell Bhutan and Nepal.
Where they use our currency.
Which are dependent on the Indian rupee. So I think, in the neighborhood, it is what we do nationally. Like China is not stopping you from building better roads between India and Nepal. Or China is not stopping you from improving your border management with Bangladesh. At least with Bangladesh, there's been significant progress. There's been expansion of trade. The Chinese have not stopped you from modernizing northeastern connections. So there, I think the problem was less is the lack of a foreign policy that is positive, but it's really your economic policy that has undermined your neighborhood relationship. And then being neighbors, nobody loves their neighbors. You are too large. And we tend to mess around in the domestic politics. Something happens in Sri Lanka, you have a Tamil issue. You have a Madhesi issue in Nepal. So you're not a normal neighbor. It's not that India can completely keep off. So balancing this becomes a problem. So I think the answers to India's neighborhood problem is what it does. If it is a better neighbor, if it improves market access, if it allows our neighbors to do better business with us, and if it facilitates greater trade with them and make them benefit from India's growth, then a lot of the problems can be sorted out on their own without having to agonize about we don't have a regional platform, because you have borders with everyone. And you can deal directly bilaterally. You can do it sub-regionally. You can do it actually through WTO, all the means that you have.
Great, so thanks so much. Everyone, we'll see you next week. Rajamandala is out next.
Thank you, Akash. Yeah.